And it was my first real internship, and what that means is while I was in college, I went and had a. Oh, I'm sorry. Saul told me to tell everybody goodbye. He has to leave, so everybody turn around and say bye to Saul. Yeah, that's important to him. Peace was the words he told me to tell you. Peace and prosperity, and he did something like this. I don't know why, but anyway, so I'm an intern, and what that means is I'm a college student, and for my summer job, I worked with a youth group. And this was back in the days when Opryland was still in Nashville, and Opryland was a big amusement park. And every summer, you get your youth group together and you go ride roller coasters and stuff. So we had gotten our Opryland trip ready, and I was sitting in my office one day and the phone rang. And when the phone rang, it was from this girl, and her name was Erica Wilson. Now, Erica was in a wheelchair. She was born with a hole in her spine. She had no control over her lower body, no control over the left side of her body, and limited control over the right side of her body. And she, like I said, she was in a wheelchair, and she came and did everything with everybody. She had a pretty rough background. Her dad kind of resented the fact that she was that way and mistreated her a little bit, but the youth group really loved her, and the church really took her in. She had a great mother. And so anyway, I'm sitting there in my office to get a phone call, and it's Erica Wilson. And she says, "Hey, Reed." And I said, "Hey, Erica, how are you?" She said, "I'm good." And she said, "Hey, I see where the youth group's going to Opryland." And I said, yeah, we're going to Opryland. She said, "Do you mind if I go? Would it be okay if can I go?" And I said, "Sure, Erica." I mean, in my mind, in all honesty, I was thinking, I don't know of what all you'd be able to do. She was very limited physically. And but I thought, sure, that'd be great. I'd love for you to go. So I said, yeah, we'd love for you to go, Erica. Well, then the next question was one that was kind of took me off guard. Her next question was, "Well, Reed, do you think I could ride a roller coaster?" Well, in my mind, I'm thinking, absolutely not. There's no way under this sun that we're going to be able to get you on a roller coaster. But what came out of my mouth was, absolutely. And we're going to put you on the biggest, fastest, tallest one that they have. And so all of a sudden, she just goes, "Yes, all right. Okay, well, I can't wait. Well, I'm going to put my name on the sign-up list." I said, "All right." So that was like a Thursday. Well, Sunday we show up for church. I go into Bible class, and everybody's kind of in a circle around Erica. And as I walk in, I heard her go, "Yeah, and he said I could ride a roller coaster too." And so I'm going, "Oh, no." And, a couple of them turned around and looked at me and said, "You told her what?" I went, "Yeah, we're going to put her on the biggest, fastest one we could find." So the trip gets closer, and I'm sitting here thinking, this is the very beginning of my career. This could be very detrimental to my career. I want to go into ministry. I want to go into youth ministry. If something goes bad here, this was a poor decision on my part, and I could just never get a job and have to go into something else. So I didn't know how it's going to work out. Well, it was Saturday morning. We showed up. Erica showed up. She was as nervous as she could be because she had psyched herself out. I had told her she could ride a roller coaster, so she had decided she was going to ride a roller coaster. But she was so nervous. She was scared to death. She did not know how it was going to go. She was big time nervous. But I had told her that she could, so she was fired up about doing it. She had not slept much that night. You could tell she was sleepy. And they had their own van they drove her in because of her wheelchair. And so they got in the van and followed us down there. We get out in the parking lot of the place where we're going. And you could tell she's been crying the whole way. And the youth group's all looking at me going, "What are you thinking? Like, why did you tell her she can ride a roller coaster? She can't ride a roller coaster." And I was like, she won't do it. I mean, she'll, I'll just explain to her that, that this was something that she could back out of, or whatever. Nobody would think anything about it. So we get out and we're at the parking lot. Like I said, she'd been crying the whole way. I pull her off to the side and I said, Erica, I need you to know something, okay? I said, I told you you can ride a roller coaster, and I think you could. I said, but you don't have to. I was like, nobody's going to think bad of you if you decide not to ride this roller coaster. Nobody's going to look down on you. Nobody's going to think you chickened out or anything like that. I said, you don't have to go. I can tell you're nervous. I can tell you don't want to do this. So don't feel like you have to. She looks at me and she goes, you said I could ride a roller coaster, so I'm riding a roller coaster today. And I was like, oh, junk. That didn't work. Okay. Well, anyway, so we go into the park and I'm thinking, what is the best roller coaster to keep someone in it? Because the goal was really threefold, okay? The goal was A, to have a job when this experience was over. That was one. Slightly second was that she be alive when it was over. And the third really was that she was just still on the roller coaster when it was over. And so I got to thinking about the hangman. And maybe some of you have ridden these. It's the kind that hangs down under. And I thought that's it because it has that whole harness that comes in. No way she's getting out of that thing, right? So I'm like, okay. I said, well, we're going to... she looks at me. She said, you said I could ride a roller coaster. I said, we're going to put you on the biggest, fastest one we can find. So we go walking in there, and the youth group all wanted to see how this is going to work. So they all followed us, and they found out that day, if you have somebody in a wheelchair, you can actually go up the back to the front of the line. She became the most popular kid in the whole youth group. But anyway, so we come up the back, and they pull us on, and it's hanging down there, and the front row is open. So I pick her up in the wheelchair, out of her wheelchair, and I put her in it, and I snap the thing down. There's this high school guy who's running the thing. I walk over, and I go, hey, dude, you think she's going to be okay in this thing? He goes, duh, I don't know, man. I was like, this is not going to go well. So anyway, the whole crowd that's standing, we broke in front of them, they're all going, he's putting her on that roller coaster. Can you believe he's doing that? She's not going to stay on that roller coaster. That's what, and they're whispering all this, and I'm going, you don't even understand. Be quiet. I don't want me to. So anyway, we pull the harness, clink, 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 pull the thing down. I'm sitting right on the front row right beside her. And so I decide, maybe this isn't the best way to put this, but she can't feel her legs anyway. So it doesn't really matter if these things are clamped down on her legs because it's going to keep her in there. So I reached through and grabbed her handle and just pulled back as hard as I could, just holding on to the thing. So I'm holding on to mine, I'm holding on to hers. The bottom drops out of this thing, and here we go. Chink, 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 chink. The first thing you do is go straight up. Chink, chink, chink. And I thought, well, we're in it now. There's no turning back, so we might as well have fun. And so right as we get to the top, the other stupid thing that I did in this, the other dumb thing that I did in this whole thing was, as we got to the very top about to go off, I looked over at her and I go, don't look down, we're pretty high up now. Well, right about that time, we go over the first thing that takes your breath, and she had just looked down, and she goes, like that, and we're going flying down this hill, and I lean forward and look over at her, and all I see her doing is going like this. And so there again, I'm thinking, okay, she's going to stay in, but now I need her to be alive when this thing's over. So I start going, scream. If she's screaming, she's breathing. If she's breathing, she's alive. Scream, Erica, you got to scream. Scream, Erica, scream. This is fun. This is so much fun. You got to scream. And I look over and, and I'm in her face. There are shades of red you've seen in life. This was way over here on the spectrum of red, she was just completely and just like this, no noise, no nothing. And I'm thinking, 2 out of 3 ain't bad, So we're going up, we're doing all these things, we're going real fast. When we get to the next thing where you kind of get a little break, where it kind of comes up and winds up for the next part. And I'm just yelling, scream, you gotta scream. And so we get up to the top of this thing and I go, Erica, you gotta scream. I have a wife, I have a daughter, I have a mother, and I have a sister. I have been around some scared women before, okay? And I have been screamed at, and I've been around screams. There has never been a sound that was like what came out of Erica's mouth when she finally caught her breath. Because when she caught her breath, it was just, ah! It was the most horrifying, it was the worst sound you've ever heard in your whole life. But she was alive. And so anyway, we take off down this thing, and it's just, ah! Like this. Well, then we hit the barrel roll. So it goes, ah! 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 Like this. And I'm thinking, we'll see what happens. So we're flying all through this thing, and Erica is just going to town over there. So finally the thing comes around, and this roller coaster comes flying in and turns around and just stops real fast. So it's, it's over. Alive, still in here, equals still has job. Everything is good, right? And so I looked over, and I'm just, I'm completely stressed out because this was just a miserable experience for me. And I look over at her and I go, well, Erica, how was it? And she just kind of flops forward like this. And she looks over at me and she goes, it was awesome. I was like, yeah, awesome. That's what it was. So we come around and we pull back into the station, and when we left, there were maybe 50 people in there and maybe 100 people in line. There were like 300 people crowded in to see the moron who put the girl in the wheelchair on the roller coaster. And they had heard her the entire time. Of course, they heard me yell and scream. They heard the whole thing that's going on. And so they're like climbing over each other like this, trying to see, what happened. She came in and she's seeing it. And I go, Erica, you're going to need to let them know something. And so with the one hand that she had limited control over, she lifted it up and she went like this, and she goes, yeah! Well, everybody in the whole place just erupts in applause for her, And like I said, the youth group followed her around for the rest of the day because we get on any rides we wanted to with Erica around. It was great. Well, I tell you that story because I want to tell you what I learned that day, okay? I learned a lot that day, actually. But one of the things I learned was, from Erica, I learned a level of commitment that I had never really seen before. She had decided to do something. And she had decided to do that based on what somebody else had told her to do. She didn't really know what a roller coaster was going to be like. I love roller coasters. I love all of them. You can put me on any. I love roller coasters. I always have. And she didn't know what it was like. She said, Reed, can I do this? I said, yes, you can do this. And based on what I said, she had enough confidence in me that she made up her mind that she was going to do something. The reality is Christianity sometimes for our teenagers is like that, for our young people. You don't really know a whole lot about what's going on out there. You just know there's stuff going on. You don't know what it's going to be like in college. You don't know what it's going to be like when you have a job. You know what school's like. You know what home's like. You know what ball's like. You know what practice is like. You know what things like that are. And we tell you, you need to be a Christian. And you say, do I need to be a Christian? And we say, yes, you need to be a Christian. And you, based on the confidence in what we're telling you, and we're showing you verses in the Bible, you say, okay, I want to be a Christian. Yeah, I want to be a Christian. And you commit not really knowing what all that entails. And you have courage. I'm telling you, I think we beat up on our teenagers too much. You are some of the best people in the world. I firmly believe that. You are some of the strongest people in the world because you're dealing with stuff every day, all day. You wake up and you go to places where there's problems and you're seeing things that you shouldn't see all day long, and you turn around and come home, and then you're supposed to be a Christian. You've got all these hours of negative influence, and you pile those up over here, and then you've got this little small pile of good influences. The times you're at worship, the friends that you have that are members of the church, the things you can't control over there, and the things you can control over here. And we say, be faithful with this pile of stuff. It's hard. And if you are here, then I respect you. I respect you because you're good people. You've got good hearts. You want to do the right thing. And I respect you because you understand commitment. But you don't sometimes know why. And what's going on? We talked about that a little bit earlier, so now I want to come back and talk to you about a little bit more. I want to go a little further and talk about I'm going to love Jesus even when. Okay? It's easy for us to say, I get my sins taken away, and if I live faithful, I get to go to heaven. But that live faithful part's the hard part, right? And we have this idea, and we looked at this last night, that if accidentally we get in our minds that if I mess up, I'm away from God. If I ask for forgiveness, I'm back with God. If I mess up, I'm away from God. And when I'm away from God, I probably shouldn't pray because I know that I feel bad about what I've done, and I don't know that God's going to hear my prayer because I've messed up and I'm over here. And then all of a sudden you go to church, you feel better about things, and you're back with God. And we kind of go back and forth like that. That's not the way this is supposed to be. That's not the idea behind this. You know, there's two passages when you go into the book of 1 John, and one of them says that Christians don't sin. But then we have other passages that say that if you say you have no sin, you're a liar. So how does that balance? It says, okay, if you say that you have no sin, you're a liar. But it goes on to say that Christians don't sin. So how do you balance that out? Well, here's the idea, okay? Here's the idea. The idea is there's never a time that a Christian should be in a situation where they are constantly sinning. You're going to sin, and you're going to mess up, and you're going to make mistakes. But that doesn't completely take you away from God. That's the idea that as Christians sin so little and sin is so loud in their lives because they're trying to do what's right, that at night when you go to bed, you should be able to pray and name every time you messed up that day and ask God for forgiveness of those things. You got to understand, God delights in forgiving. He wants to forgive. Now, that's not an excuse for us to do what's wrong. The Corinthians had a problem with that. And he said, what shall we say then? Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? No. He said, certainly not. How can those of us who've died to sin live any longer in it? And the concept there is I'm not a sinner. I'm a Christian who sins. And I want to not sin. I'm not going to take advantage of the forgiveness that God offers me and do what I want to do and just say, well, He's going to forgive me anyway and come back in it. God doesn't want that. A person should be so grateful for the fact that their sins have been forgiven that they don't want to do anything. It's kind of like my grandmother kept foster kids, just dozens of foster kids throughout the time my dad was growing up. And they always used to tell me a story about this little boy that they got. And they thought he had brown hair. They got him home and gave him a bath, cleaned him up, had to wash his hair 4 or 5 times. He actually was blonde-headed. He was so dirty from the home he'd been living in. His clothes were awful and filthy or terrible. They got him in there, gave him a bath. They washed him up real good. They put some new blue jeans on him, a new T-shirt on him, and he went out to play with some of the other kids. And my grandmother tells me, I talk to my grandmother all the time. She's awesome. I call her about 3 days a week, and we chat all the time. And she tells me a story about how she was sitting there doing the dishes or something, and she heard the door open, and this kid just came running right by her and took off and went into the bathroom and closed the bathroom door. She thought, well, I guess he needs to go to the bathroom. He knows where it is. That's fine. He just needs to figure his way around the house. Well, all of a sudden she hears the tub, the water from the tub running. And she goes in and opens the door, and this kid's taking all of his clothes off. And she said, what are you doing? He goes, I got dirty. Well, he had just gone out. He'd only been out there 10 minutes. But he was so excited about being clean. He was so excited about being clean, he didn't know what it felt like. I mean, he came from a terrible situation. He was so excited to be clean, and he loved that feeling. He went outside, and he got a little bit of dirt on him. He was ready to get back in there and get that stuff off because he didn't want it on him anymore. That's the way we ought to view Christianity. That's the way we ought to view our lives. We're so grateful to be clean that if we get a little bit honest, we want it off, and we want it off now. And so what that brings us to is deciding to commit. But the problem with commitment is sometimes things aren't exactly the way we want them to go. The problem with commitment is sometimes it's not like listen, I asked my wife to marry her or to marry me. She said yes, luckily. And we had been married about 3 months. And she came walking through. I have her permission to tell a story, by the way. She came walking through with like some toilet tissue and some tweezers. And I said, what are you going to do with those? She said, oh, you're going to. And I said, I'm going to do what? She goes, I need to get my eyebrows. And I went, do what? She goes, yeah. She lays down on my lap and she hands me the tweezer and just goes, pull the short ones that are down there. I said, what are you talking about? I did not sign up for this. Okay? There's a lot of stuff about marriage that I did sign up for. Plucking your eyebrows was not one of those. Your dad is the one who performed our wedding ceremony. He didn't say anything about plucking your eyebrows. I mean, I made a commitment to you, but this is not exactly what I had in mind. Sometimes when it comes to our relationship with God and with Christianity, we make a commitment, but all of a sudden it's not exactly like we thought it was going to be. It's not exactly what we thought it was going to be. And there's times that are difficult, and there's times that are hard, and there's times that are whatever. And so I want to take just a couple minutes and look at, I'm going to love Jesus even when. I'm going to love Jesus even when. And I want you to go, we're going to talk about the 10 lepers. I want you to go in your Bible to Luke chapter 17. Maybe it was that this man came home one day. I don't know the backstory, but it's easier for me to understand these if I can kind of think about them in terms where I can visualize what happened. Maybe it was that he came home one day. He had been at work. His hands were dirty. And maybe it was that he walked around back or went into the bathroom there in his house, whatever, and he was washing his hands. And he was washing his hands, getting all the dirt and everything off of them. He could smell supper getting ready. And he looked down, and when he went to wash, there was something there. And then he washed it again. It didn't come off. And he kept washing it again. He looked at it, and there was a spot there. He hadn't seen that spot before. And he got under there and started scrubbing it off. And, I mean, it wouldn't go anywhere. So he kind of got down and started looking at it, and he realized what it was. He realized it was that disease that was really contagious. And then it would start in a small spot on your appendages, and then it would start growing, and your fingers would rot off. It would grow out to go onto your nose, maybe your toes. That's how it would start, and it would just eat your skin away. And maybe it was that his little girl came around and said, Daddy, you're home. He said, honey, don't come close. I've got to do something. Back then when they had leprosy, they had to go into colonies. They didn't know what to do with them. They would quarantine them. You go back to the Old Testament, there were some kind of leprosies that could be healed pretty quickly if they quarantined themselves. Some leprosies were just like rashes and weren't that big of a deal. But if they were in a colony with other groups for extended periods of time, it was because they had the leprosy that was going to eventually kill them, and they would just put them together. They still have places like that in the world today. I have a friend who lives in India, and he talks about going to the leper colony, and they spend time with those folks there, and they have that, since they're medicated, they can't catch it, but those folks already have it. And that's still actually going on today. But because of the law of the Old Testament, they had to completely separate themselves from everybody else with one another. And when you were pulled off to the side like that, it was just awful. You were away from your family. If you walked through the town, if you did happen to break out and go somewhere, or you were moving somewhere, you had to scream, unclean, unclean. You had to draw attention to the fact that you weren't like everybody else, and that you were dirty, and that you were contagious, and that you had a disease. And this man came through. You heard about this man. You heard about this man. You heard that he was healing folks. You didn't know if it was true or not. I mean, you heard that he was doing it. Maybe it was that your family came and sent a note over to you, or called across from the other side of the wall, or whatever the case was, and said, we've heard of a man who's coming to town. He can heal you. And there's just a little bit of hope for the first time in a long time You know, you think you're going to die with these people. And you call out. You say, I understand that you can heal me. Can you heal me? Look what happens right here. Now it happened, verse 11, that as he went to Jerusalem, that he passed through the midst of Samaria and Galilee. He entered into a certain village. There met him 10 men who were lepers, who stood afar off. They couldn't come close to him. And they lifted up their voice and said, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. So when he saw them, he said to them, go show yourselves to the priests. And so it was that as they went, they were cleansed. Well, here's what happened right there in the Old Testament. In order to be accepted back into society, if you had quarantined yourself and your disease had gone away, which was possible with some forms of it, then you could go show yourself to the priest. He could examine you and say, okay, you are able to go back into to your family and be a part of society again. And so when he said to them, go show yourself to the priest, that was, I don't know if this worked or not, but we're going to try it. And they're taken off. And it says, as they go, they're cleansed. I mean, think about that. There's a lot of pain associated with this. Maybe your feet were hurting. Maybe your arms were hurting. Maybe your face was hurting. Whatever the case. And as you're going, all of a sudden this pain is going away and you're seeing yourself be healed here and you're heading because you're getting to go back to your family. You're getting to go back and there's 10 of these folks. Verse 15. Now one of them, when he saw that he was healed, returned and with a loud voice glorified God, fell down on his face at his feet, giving him thanks. The Bible says he was a Samaritan. There was 10 of them, and one of them comes back to thank God and glorify God. I got a deep respect for this gentleman. I don't know, if I'm being honest with you, if I would have joined him if I was one of the 10. I don't know. Because if I was clean and I was able to go back to my family and get away from this place, I would probably just go on and maybe try to find him later is probably what I would do. I would want to get to the priest as quickly as possible and get on back to my family is probably what I'd do. I got to be honest with you. So I have a deep respect for the man who's running away and stops and turns around and goes back and says, with a loud voice, he's screaming this, thank you so much, thank you, thank you, thank you. You know, the idea that I want to look at here is we need to love Jesus even when others don't. You know, even when others don't. You know, you're at school. You may even be in a family where people aren't living the way God wants them to. I mean, I grew up in a family where we went to church for a little while. My dad would go forward because we hadn't been in a long time. My dad was a great song leader. He would lead singing. We would go to Bible class, and we'd be there every Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night, and all of a sudden we'd kind of start slowly moving back, and we wouldn't go for a while. We'd be gone for 6 months, and then we'd go back, and Dad would go forward, and we'd get to going back again, and that was just kind of a cycle we did. And I remember when I was 14 years old, we had missed church, and I remember distinctly one night praying to God, begging Him to forgive me for missing worship, and that when I turned 16, if He would forgive me then, I'd never miss another one as long as I lived, and I haven't. I missed one time, actually. You know, and I understand what it's like to be in a home where people are good, but maybe they're not what they ought to be, and sometimes you feel like you're the only one that's doing what God wants you to do at the house. You know, it's tough. You know, I know what it's like to be in a school where you're a Christian. I mean, I remember one time on the baseball, on the bus on the way to a baseball game, I was dating a guy's cousin, and he looked at me and asked me if we had done any things that we shouldn't have been doing. And I said, no. And he goes, why not? And I said, because I'm a Christian. And he goes, you're a Christian? That means you've never done anything like that? Is that what you're telling me? I said, yes. And he and all my friends turned around and started laughing at me. I said, I really don't care what you guys think. I was friends with all of them. We were friends afterwards, but I had to sit there by myself. I mean, I know what that feels like. Sometimes you feel like you're the only one. I mean, you got to think about Jesus. Jesus felt that way. Jesus definitely felt that way. As a matter of fact, Elijah felt that way when he stood on Mount Carmel and said, I'm the only one left who will stand up for God. He was in front of the whole nation and these prophets of Baal. And he said, I'm the only one. I'm the only one left. And so when Jesus was about to go to his death, he was upset and nervous about it. He knew what was happening. So we know it as the Transfiguration, where Moses and Elijah show up there and they're speaking to Jesus. And Moses was saying, I know what it's like to lead people who don't want to follow you. And Elijah was saying, I know what it's like to feel like you're the only one. Jesus needed that reinforcement. Sometimes you feel like you're the only one. But I'm going to love Jesus even if I'm the only one. I'm going to love Jesus even if nobody else is. And we've got to get that in our minds, that that's just who we are and what we're going to do. And if loving Jesus based on His words is keeping His commandments, then what that means is I'm going to do what I'm supposed to do, and I'm not going to do what I'm not supposed to do, and it doesn't matter what everybody else is doing. And I'm going to tell you something. I mentioned this earlier, but I'm going to say it again. We got this idea of peer pressure. Let me tell you what peer pressure is, okay? You want the Reed Swindle definition of peer pressure? Your definition of peer pressure is my friends trying to talk me into doing things that I know I shouldn't do. You know what my definition of peer pressure is? An excuse to do what you know is wrong. Now there's your definition of peer pressure. Because you folks are hard-headed people. Ask your parents. Ask your parents when they're trying to get you to clean your room or eat something you don't want to eat. You are hard-headed people who will dig your heels in and not do what you don't want to do, no matter what your peers say. And so peer pressure is an excuse to do what you want to do. Because if I tried to talk you into doing something extremely radically crazy that might take away your life, it would be very easy for you to go, you're crazy, I'm not doing this, and turn around and walk away. Then why not with the small stuff? You know, sometimes you might be the only one, but the saying goes, me plus God equals the majority. If God is for me, who can be against me? I'm okay with being the only one doing the right thing because I know who God is, and I know what Jesus promises, and I know what He's trying to give me. And I'm okay to be the only one doing that. And so we need to make up our minds that we're going to do the right thing. We're going to love Jesus even when others don't. Now I want you to go back just a little bit to Mark chapter 10. Mark chapter 10, a young gentleman comes to Jesus. We call him the rich young ruler. I would throw in another word if I were doing this. I'm not saying I know any more than the people who put these little titles in here, but I would say the good rich young ruler. Because I think this man was a good man. I think he's indicating that. I think this gentleman gets a very bad rap because he was put in a hard situation and it was difficult for him to do the right thing. He was a wealthy person, but when he comes to him and says, what can I do to go to heaven? Wouldn't we walk up to Jesus and go, Jesus, what can I do to be with you? If he turned around and looked and said, I want you to sell every single thing you own. I want you to give it all away and come follow me. That'd be a tough one. I got to be honest with you. If you're just your average person, that's a tough one. But Jesus turns around, looks at him and says, well, here's a couple things you need to do. You make sure you do this, make sure you do this, make sure you do this, make sure you do this. And the man goes, sweet. I've been doing those. I mean, what if Jesus walks up to you and you said, hey, what can I do to get to heaven? He goes, well, here's what you need to do. I need you to don't cuss, don't drink, don't smoke. Think about marriage and what's going on there. Be baptized, go to church. What are you going to say? Sweet. I'm doing this right. He goes, well, you got one more thing. Okay, what's that? I need you to sell everything you have and give it away. I think this was a good man. I think he was a good man with a tough choice. I think this was just a tough choice for him. He was obviously a good man. He'd been doing all these things. He would fit right in at church with us. Matter of fact, he'd probably be a song leader or something, If he was married and had some kids, might be a deacon. This is a good man. It's hard for me to look down on this fella. He just had a tough choice to make. And I want to tell you something. The idea that we get from this is we're going to love Jesus even when it's hard. You know, when it's not easy. There was a girl in my youth group several years ago, and I got to know her, and her dad was a deacon at another congregation way outside of town, out a little small congregation out in the woods. And I went out and fished with him and his son out in a creek they had out not too far from their house. I got to know him real well. He was a deacon at this small congregation. He had this perfect life. His wife was beautiful. He had this great daughter who would just sing like like when she went out in the woods and sang, small woodland creatures gathered around her, I mean, she just had this great, beautiful voice. And he had this country boy son who had an accent and was probably dipping when he was 4 years old and shouldn't have been kind of thing. I'm just kidding about that. But he was just a country boy, you know what I'm saying? And he had this perfect life. He had this little house, and it had this little white fence in front of it, and it was right in front of this hill. The man had goats back on the hill. I mean, what kind of life? He got goats, I mean, this is a good life. This is a great, great life. Well, I had moved away, hadn't talked to him in a long time, and his daughter actually married one of my buddies, and they asked me to come back and perform their wedding, and so I drove all the way back from Texas to Nashville to do their wedding. And when I run into them, I'd heard that there was a problem with her mom and dad, and I didn't know exactly what it was. And so at the rehearsal and all that, I ran into her dad. He was a buddy of mine, and he goes, "Well, I guess you've heard." And I said, "Well, I heard little. What's going on?" He goes, "Well," he said, I made a mistake." So what's that? And he goes, "Well, I spent some time with a lady I wasn't married to." And I said, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "And we got divorced." He said, but the good news is I found somebody else and I'm going to get remarried." Well, I don't know where you are on that issue, but I think the Bible's pretty clear. And so in a very loving way, I looked at him and I said, "Man, you know you can't do that." And he looked at me and he goes, "Hang on just a second. Say that again." It was real weird. I said, "You know you can't do that. You can't remarry under those circumstances." And he goes, "I want you to know you're the first person who said that to me. Everybody else who was a member of the church had just told me congratulations and just kind of get me out of there and just not deal with them. You're the first person who's actually said something." He said, "Could you and I talk about that?" And I said, "Absolutely, we'll talk about that." I said, "I'll be driving back to Texas tomorrow. I got a 12-hour trip by myself. Call me." And so he did. The next day, when I was leaving, he called me. And we talked for a minute. And I said, "Well, tell me what's going on." He said, "Well, I was working with this woman, and we became real good friends. We got into a relationship that was inappropriate." And he said, "But man, I fell in love with her." He said, "So I went home, and I told my wife. I looked at her, and I said, I walked in the door, and he said, I've been thinking about this for a while, and I finally got enough guts. And I walked into her and said, look, I just want you to know that I've fallen in love with another woman. I'm leaving you, and I'm going to go be with her." And she was not happy about that. There was a lot of throwing and stuff, and she helped him move his stuff out into the driveway very quickly. And he loaded all his stuff up and drove 3 counties over, because they worked in the county that was between theirs, and she was coming from that side. And he pulls up to that woman's house, and he knocks on the door, and nobody comes to the door. And he knocks on the door again. It cracks open just a little bit, and this woman peeks out and she goes, "What are you doing here?" And he goes, "I told my wife about us." She goes, "You did what?" He said, "Yeah, I told my wife about us, and I left, and I'm coming to live with you." She goes, "You can't do that. I don't want that. That's never what I had in mind. Get your stuff, go back to your wife, and beg her to take you back. This is over. This is not what this was supposed to be." So he loads up and goes back. And his wife looked at him and said, "No." And he looked at me and he said, "Reed," well, he didn't look at me. He was actually on the phone. He said, "Reed, I've never been so unhappy in my life." He said, I know what I did was wrong. But I know that God wants me to be happy too." He said, "So I met another woman, and we've been dating, and we've decided to get married." He said, "Now, Tell me what you were talking about. And I said, you know what the Bible says. You were the one that made a mistake here, and you do not have the right to remarry. I said, but there's two things I want you to think about. First of all, and you might want to write this one down. I said, God is more concerned about your obedience than He is your happiness. God is more concerned about your obedience than He is your happiness. This is why. Because He knows what's at the end of this life, and He knows what obedience and disobedience will do. And it would be a whole lot better for you to look back on this life and had a little time where you weren't happy with something, where you didn't like the way things were, but be in heaven, than to look back and have changed what you believed and done something you shouldn't have done, trying to get happiness then, and miss the opportunity to go to heaven. And I said, secondly, I want you to ask yourself something. I said, if you could take yourself back 2 years, if you could go back and talk to yourself 2 years ago, what would you tell yourself? He said, I'd tell myself, don't do this. It's not worth it. This is the biggest mistake you're ever going to make. Do not do this. You've got this great family. You've got this great thing going on. Do not do anything to mess it up. And I said, would you listen to yourself? And he said, I would hope that I would listen to myself. I said, then fast forward to the day of judgment. He said, okay. And I said, what would you come back and tell yourself right now? And he said, I'd tell myself, don't do it. And I said, well, will you listen to yourself? That was tough for him. You know, he put himself in a bad situation, but he found himself in a very tough situation. Sometimes you're not going to find yourself in a situation like that, but let's face it, sometimes it's hard to be a Christian. Nobody ever said that being a Christian was going to be easy. I will promise you that it's the very best way you can live a life, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's always going to be easy. Sometimes it's going to be hard. Sometimes you're going to I saw something the other day, and I'm so glad somebody said it because I've been saying it for a long time. Sometimes the reason you got problems in your life is because you did something dumb. You know? I mean, it's not always somebody else's fault. Sometimes you did something dumb and you got to deal with it. That's just the way it is. And God is more concerned about your obedience than He is your happiness. And sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's hard to feel like you're the only one. Sometimes it's hard to do what's right when other people are trying to talk you into doing something wrong. Sometimes it's hard when you're trying just to keep your head afloat. Listen, I don't swim well, okay? Do you see this right here? This is not made for several things, and swimming is one of those things that this is not made for, okay? It's not really made for running, even though I make it do it. This is not made, I see these swimmers, I watch like Phelps and all these guys in the Olympics, and they're just so graceful, It's just I look like I'm swatting flies just to keep my head above water, I mean, when I jump in, I just go straight to the bottom. I have to work 10 times harder than everybody else to keep my head afloat. Listen to me and listen close to me. Sometimes there are days as Christians that the ultimate success was to keep your head above water. We tell you you're supposed to save everybody and you're supposed to evangelize and teach all these folks. Listen to me. There's some days where the very best thing you can do is keep your head above water. The very best thing you can do is not mess up. Just get home, having finished the day, not having done something that you shouldn't have done. Not worried about everybody else. Sometimes it's that hard. And ultimate success on that day is just keeping your head above water. I'm going to tell you something. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. Lifeguards are taught that if there is someone struggling and you are in a tense situation, you are to protect yourself first so that you are still available to protect them. You are supposed to save yourself first so that you are available to save them. Some days, the very best thing you can do is not mess up. And that's victory. God can use that. God can do something with that. And you have to make up your mind and say, even when it's hard, I'm going to love Jesus. I'm going to do what God wants me to. Go to John chapter 6. John chapter 6, there's this strange situation. Jesus began to teach a little deeper. Some people didn't like the way he was teaching. They liked the parables because they were stories and they were easy, and the parables were phenomenal, actually. They made them think. They could sit them on their heart in the back of their mind, chew on them a little bit, and they'd grow and become bigger. They'd understand concepts. That's what Jesus was wanting. But there were some specifics that he got into, and he started talking to them about eating his flesh and drinking his blood. It was a foreshadow to the Lord's Supper. It was an idea of commitment. Some of them didn't understand that. They thought that was weird. As a matter of fact, that was a big part of the problem with Jesus after he died. There was a rumor running around that his followers stole his body so they could do what he was teaching them in John chapter 6, where they could eat his flesh and drink his blood, because that's what he had said, and they had heard that. So there's a big misunderstanding on this. But it's kind of interesting as you go through this. There's a lot of folks who couldn't deal with this one. Jesus said something, I don't understand it, so I don't like it, so I'm not going to do it, so I'm questioning you quite a bit, man. And look what he says, verse 60, therefore many of his disciples, when they heard this, said, this is a hard saying, who can understand this? When Jesus knew in himself that his disciples murmured about this, he said, does this offend you? And what I'm telling you, does it offend you? And he goes on and explains just a little bit more about it. And then you get to verse 64. He says, for Jesus knew from the beginning who they were, would not believe, and who would betray him. Now look at verse 66. After he explained this to them, there was a hard thing, something they didn't understand. Verse 66 says, from that time many of the disciples went back and walked with him no more. They were in when it was easy, and they were in when he was making fish come out of baskets. They were in when he was walking across the sea, and they were in when he was doing his tricks, and everything was cool with that, you know. When all of his miracles and all the things he could do, they were in. But all of a sudden, you talk about something I'm not so sure about. Many of his disciples turned around and walked away. And let me tell you what he didn't do. He didn't go running after them. I think that's pretty interesting. Jesus didn't turn around and go, wait, y'all come back here. Oh, you misunderstood. I don't want y'all to go anywhere. Y'all are really important to me. Get over here. I need to sit back down. Let me ask all the questions you want to. I'll answer them all. That is not what he did. He turned around, looked to the ones left, and he goes, y'all want to go too? Look at what it says. Look at what it says, verse 67. Then Jesus said to the 12, do you also want to go away? Listen, there are going to be things about Christianity that you don't quite understand. You're going to understand more. That's the whole point. That's the whole purpose of growth, is you're going to understand. You're going to hear a sermon one day on baptism, and you're going to think, I didn't know. That can make so much sense now, you know. I mean, I understood I was supposed to do that. I understood what it did, but now I see it from a total different angle. That's called growth, people. That's what you're supposed to be doing. But there's going to be things, and you just don't understand those things, and you have to say, you know what? I'm going to love Jesus even when I don't understand. Even when I don't understand what's going on. Because let me tell you what Jesus is going to say. If you refuse to try to find an answer, you won't take anybody else with you? Because a big group of people turned around and walked away from Jesus because they didn't understand, and he turned around and looked at the rest of them and said, y'all want to go too? But Peter, my man, I love Peter. Peter gets a bad rap because he fell in the water. Let me tell you what Peter did. He got out of the boat. Nobody else got out of the boat. Peter got out of the boat. I wouldn't have got out of the boat. I'd have seen Jesus walking across the water and said, Jesus, what are you doing out there? Get in this boat. Peter said, Jesus, that you out there? I'm coming out there with you. So I respect Peter for being out there. He fell in the water, but he got out of the boat. I respect that. Oh, he was the one that denied Jesus 3 times. Yep. But I believe firmly he was trying not to do it. Because if you watch the progression of what was going on there, Jesus said, you're going to deny me 3 times. He said, I'm not going to. He said, you will. Before the rooster crows in the morning, you're going to. These men show up, and who was it that pulled the sword out and whacked the ear off of Malchus? It was him. He was aiming for his head. That's the only way he would have gotten his ear. He wouldn't have pulled it out and gone like this, you know. He was pulling that thing out, going for his head. He was thinking, this is the first time that I was supposed to deny him, and I didn't. Jesus heals him. Everybody takes off. Mark ran off naked. I mean, read it. It's exactly what it says. Peter turned around and followed him. That's number 2. He gets to the courtyard and decides whether or not he's going in. Am I going in? Am I not? Am I going in? Am I not? No, I'm not denying Jesus. And he walks in. There's 3. I believe that he thought he was, I think he thought he had already licked it. I think he had already proven. I would fight for you, I'll follow you, and I'll come right in there close with you. Close enough they could make eye contact. But when he got in there, he went into self-preservation mode. Do you know this guy? Nope. Well, you sound like him. I don't know him. Do you know this guy? No, stop. I can see what happened there. I respect Peter. Verse 68, Simon Peter answered him, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of life. I love Peter. I think I'm probably a lot like Peter. He was out there. He was outgoing. He was the first to respond. He was the first to get out there. There's kind of a little joke that you can read about in the book of John where John was talking about how they were running and John outran Peter and got to the tomb first. John was writing and he said, by the way, I'm faster than Peter was, But Peter was the one that went in the tomb first. I like Peter. All these people turn and walk away. I'm not exactly sure Peter understood what Jesus was talking about. He turns around, looks at him and says, you guys want to go too? And he goes, well, where would we go? You have the words of life. I'm going to love you when others won't. I'm going to love you when it's difficult. I'm going to love you when I don't understand. And that's what we have to have, That's the kind of way we have to look at our relationship with God. And that's the way we have to try to approach what we know about Jesus and what He's trying to accomplish in our lives and what He did for us. It's one thing to hear that He died for you and put that together. I mean, yeah, I get that, but died for me. And here's the truth of the matter. If I'm being real honest, there's probably a whole lot of people in here who are such good people, and you've done so few things that are wrong because you're good people that you don't even understand why Jesus would have had to die for you, because you really ain't done that much bad stuff anyway. And so there's some parts of this we just don't understand, and it's hard for us to grab. But here's the reality of it. I can still love Jesus. And my love for Jesus can continue to grow and continue to be stronger and continue to grow and understand more things about it. I have to make up my mind that I'm going to love Jesus. I don't care what anybody else does. I'm going to love Jesus. And when it's hard and this Christianity thing turned into something that I didn't really expect, and I don't know that this isn't really what I signed up for, I'm going to love Jesus. And there's going to be times where I come across a verse and I cannot figure out why in the world the Bible says you have to hate your mother and your father to follow Him. That doesn't make any sense to me. I don't understand it. When you go and look at it, the word from the original language actually means to love less, but it got translated into hate. Jesus said it, so it must be right, so I understand it, but I don't understand, and I wish I understood more. I'm going to love Jesus during those times. When Jamie got in touch with me and we were talking about speaking, he said, what would you like to speak about? What would be a good topic? I said, I want to talk about Jesus. I want to talk about Jesus, and I want to talk about loving Jesus, because none of these rules matter if we don't love Jesus. Worshiping doesn't matter if we don't love Him. We're not doing it right if we don't love Jesus. Just because we're not doing it wrong doesn't automatically mean that we are doing it right. I've got to love Jesus for worship to matter. If I'm trying not to sin, but I don't love Jesus, then it doesn't matter. Why am I trying? What's the point? The whole idea behind this is, yes, there are a list of things that I've got to do. There are a list of things I've got to stay away from. But the whole purpose of those things is loving Jesus and doing them because I trust Him more than I trust myself. And having more confidence in Him and what He knows than what I can see. And if He says, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments, and that's how I show you my love, then what I'm saying to you in that, what I'm saying to Jesus in that is this. Everybody else may not be doing this. This might be tough, and I don't quite understand. But I trust you enough that if this is what you want me to do and this is what you don't want me to, then I'm going to love you enough to do it the way you want me to. I'm going to love you enough to do it the way you want me to. Let me tell you this right now. If you like to write things down, I'd write this one down too, okay? God will bless you later for the decisions that you make now. Please understand that. God will bless you later for the decisions that you make now. Start in Genesis and see how many times that's happened. You look at Joseph. Good decision, good decision, good decision, good decision, good decision, blessed. God will bless you later for the decisions that you make now. So I want you to think about that, because that helps us understand how to love God more. If I know that this is going to turn out best. I could talk some more and have a whole lot more to say, but I've talked a lot. We're going to offer the invitation now. You know, maybe there's someone here who has been thinking about some of the things we've talked about, and there's something that's bothering you, something that's on your heart, something you've done, something people know about, something people don't know about, something you wish nobody ever knew about. But you know God does, and you plan on changing it sometime, but just quite hadn't, you haven't found the time to do that yet. Let us help you. Prayer works. I believe in prayer. I've seen lives change because we pray for them. We'll pray for you, and we'll pray with you, and we'll do anything we can to help you. And we're not just going to pray for you now. We're going to pray for you all week. If you need something sometime, there's people available to help you. Maybe there's someone here who's not been baptized for forgiveness of your sins. We'd love to study with you about that and show you exactly what God expects and what He promises, the very best life a person can live. So if we can help you in any way, please come as we stand and sing. 'Cause He gave His everything.